important to do all the refining that you can. What I do have up here are a few sure forms. Not only will your rib tool help, okay, so again, going from one side, going back to this side, going back to this side, going back to this side, doing every single edge back and forth with your rib tool, but as well using sure form. A sure form you use by gliding towards you, and it shaves off material and straightens edges. So sure forms are very, very helpful in the refining process. So making sure all my edges are really nice and clean, things look as straight as possible. If you do not get to a point of cutting the lid today, you need to, without a doubt, poke one hole into the form. That means using your knife and really putting a hole into the form. If you don't do this, it will start drying. It will start wanting to move inward because of shrinkage. It will look for room to be able to do that. If it can't do it because it's trapped air, it will find a way to move inward. And that is by cracking and separating at your joints. So if you do not get to that point today of cutting the lid, you need to make sure you do that, or else there is a really good chance your piece will be broken by Tuesday. So my recommendation when it comes to cutting the lid, the first thing I like to do, and again, it's deciding how you want your piece to look. So if you guys could look this way for a second. When I have my lantern or whatever I have, what is important when you have a person, let's say, that has your piece and they lift it up and they put it back down, if you had just a straight cut across the whole thing, your pieces are not absolutely square or rectangular. I guarantee you, they're slightly off because you're building with a flexible material. So if you cut just a straight line and you ask somebody to put that lantern lid back on, I guarantee it, they're gonna go like this. It doesn't really fit too well. They're gonna go like this. Well, it seems a little bit off. They're gonna go like this. And eventually, they'll find the right place, but it might take them multiple tries to do it. Because again, your pieces are not perfect. Mine isn't. So, I usually will cut a curve or some sort of notation to have the viewer understand how to put the lid back. So you might wonder, why did I cut all of them with a curve or anything like that? Well, it's because the viewer could be like, I see this arch here, I see that here. Oh, I lined it back up. This also includes this kind of piece here. So when I take this lid off here, I could then see, oh, it has a point here. It has that there. I'll line it back up that way. Instead of somebody coming over to your piece and being like, because a straight line or a straight cut will cause the viewer to do that. So these are just things to think about. The other thing I do not recommend, some students will do cuts like this all across. So this would be how the lid would fit on. These little sharp angles will cause some distortion. They will have some distortion if you pull that off, and they will usually not fit well back. So just advice, don't try and do something that's like this, that the one form fits back into the other. It won't work. So whether or not you choose to just have a fluid line, whatever. You can do things where there is, let's say, one of the things I like to do is I'll put a stamp here and a stamp here. So the viewer understands that those two markings line up when you're putting the piece back together. So these are just aesthetic things on how to make a piece that, again, it is super embarrassing when somebody picks up the form and has no idea how to put it back. So those are simple words of advice, but now I need to demonstrate how to cut it. I need to grab a pen really quick. I usually will draw it out first. That is pretty important to have an idea of how you're going to do this. So I'll draw out an idea of how I want the lid cut to be. And the most important thing is that the two last edges line up. All right, so the way that I cut this, if you do this wrong, you're gonna have to start over. So all of these lids are cut in the same fashion as you would cut a pumpkin. So why does a pumpkin lid sit back in place? It's cut at a 45-degree angle, pretty much. It's cut like this the whole way. If it's cut like this, it could just slide right off. So the entire way that I cut this, the whole way, my knife needs to remain at a 45-degree angle. It cannot go like this. So I've drawn out. I'm going to insert my knife at that 45-degree angle. And now I have to just maintain that as I'm cutting. When I get to a corner, I go a little slower. I'm going to make sure I really pull this way. Now, when I get to the very edge, I usually will remove my knife, turn the piece, reinsert my knife at the same angle. I don't like to drag across because I can rip the seam. So again, if I have a point, I stop at the point. I remove my knife. I reinsert the knife. Again, I'm at an edge. I pull all the way to the corner, remove my knife, turn the board, reinsert the knife, do not ask me to cut your lid for you. A lot of times I get that from students because they're very, very worried about this. This is part of the project. It is not that hard. Again, I'm at a point, so I'm going to remove my knife. I'm going to reinsert. You just have to do this slowly. So I've met all the way around. Really carefully, I am going to slowly lift this up. If I missed anywhere by taking my knife out and back in, by especially at the corners. If I pry very quickly, I can rip a lot. Like I can rip a lot of the areas that maybe weren't cut fully. So I'm slowly lifting, making sure everything's cut. If I'm like, that's not really giving too well. Why isn't that giving? Okay, I need to probably reinsert my knife. Make sure that's really cut fully instead of just ripping it up. All right, so when I take my lid off, what I may notice is some strangeness. Like you could see, you see this over here? What I don't want to do is remove it. Okay, that's where my knife might have slipped. It's normal, but I'm gonna make sure that I blend it back. If I remove it, my lid will not fit back. So any areas that look like my knife might have slipped and pulled a little bit up, I'm gonna push it back down. Now I can see very clearly where I did not do my reinforced coil, and I can do my reinforced coil at those locations. But the other thing that I want to make sure that I do is refine every single one of these edges that I cut. I do not want them to be razor sharp. I want them to be rounded and smooth and refined. But while doing that, I do not want to alter it. Okay, I want the lid to fit back down. So how I cut is how I cut. If I want this to be a tight fitting lid, I can't change much of it, but I can soften things up. And I'll do that as well on the lid. But that is how to cut it. Again, I do recommend that you give your viewer some area to have an understanding. So I can see right here, there's a peak here, peak here. I know that my lid goes right back like that.